En 1995, Gabriel García Márquez creó en Cartagena la Fundación para el Nuevo Periodismo Iberoamericano. Tras 27 años impulsando el periodismo independiente, ético, innovador y riguroso, ahora somos Fundación Gabo. Somos taller de periodismo. Formamos, inspiramos, incentivamos y conectamos a periodistas de toda Iberoamérica. Somos Premio Gabo. Premiamos el mejor periodismo en español y portugués. Somos Festival Gabo. Celebramos en Bogotá el poder de las historias en la mayor fiesta del periodismo y la curiosidad. Somos Centro Gabo. A partir del legado de Gabo promovemos proyectos de desarrollo social, cultural y educativo. Somos Fundación Gabo. Con camaradería y chéveridad desde el Caribe colombiano, promovemos un mejor periodismo, la creatividad y la memoria de nuestro fundador.
Buenas tardes para todos y todas.
Good afternoon to you all. I'm Jessica Rita Mahul, Project Coordinator of the Gabo Foundation. I cordially welcome you to this web chat series on Explore Territories of Migration, Borders, Mobility, and Integration, convened by the Gabo Foundation in the framework of the Partnership with International Organization for Migration, IOM. This web series called Migration in Central America, Beyond the Southern Border, will last 1 hour and will include the participation of Alberto Pradilla from Spain, Cindy Regidor from Nicaragua, Mónica González Islas from Mexico, and Carlos Martinez from El Salvador. I remind you that this activity will have an initial part of a conversation among the guests. Then we will move on to a section for questions from part of the audience. We have simultaneous interpretation. You can choose your language in the bottom part of the screen. Alberto, I formally welcome you as moderator of this activity. Thanks to you and to each of the panelists for accepting our invitation. Thank you very much, Jessica. It's an honor to be here with you today, to be here together with the reporters who I do admire, and these reporters have had the opportunity to work in the past with. It's important to talk about this topic in Central American migration and the role of Mexico, because in the recent years we've seen very important changes and relevant changes. One element that we cannot forget is that Donald Trump was very efficient in subcontracting the southern countries as part of that world that he always wanted to impose, and developed a logic, perverse logic, in which exposed, countries like Guatemala and Mexico were really keeping the control of the migration processes during these past years. We've seen terrible tragedies like in Tamargo, Camauipas, in Chiapas, or the recent wildfires in Juarez that ended the life of 40 people. But furthermore, it has changed. Apart from engaging the vulnerable countries in migratory control, there are elements that have changed in South American immigration and other countries. The increase of detentions last year were only 444 people detained by the Institute Immigration in Mexico. So also the elements that our reporters will talk today, what's happening in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and also in Guatemala. So we have facing new challenges. What is the routes, the actors, the role of the authorities, and in the organized crime? With this, I would like to ask the first question to my colleagues, starting with Monica. What is happening, Monica, with the migration coverage in South America and Mexico? Monica, you have the floor. Oh, hello. Thank you so much for your invitation. Thank you very much to the Gabo Foundation for the invitation and for being here with us today. So one of the most important things or the most difficult things to assimilate is that mobility is increasing massively. It's it's a lot of people that is going into transit, and this takes us out of the context as we were accustomed of living the immigration in Central America, because we had an experience of with cycles, with natural disasters, and difficult things with on part of the government. The governments of the countries in South America or the South Cone, but this collapses once migrations arrives coming from other continents. And in Mexico, if it was one of the most difficult countries to transit, it's a disaster now because there's a huge amount of people, the people who are in transit and plus the migration. We have the internal migration in Mexico due to the violence, and afterwards we have also the people expelled from the United States, not only from the north, but also from the south, that are seeking these opportunities in the United States. The migration that we already had due to different conditions in Central America, and unfortunately, the migration coming from other continents. This worsens a lot of the conditions because the policy is strengthened, but there's something very important that we have to pay attention to the misinformation that comes with, let's say, when we have the Title 42, when we have the COVID-19, Title 8. So this is a misinformation for those who are in transit and regarding the language that we use in Mexico. Yes, Carlos, would you like to answer the question? What's your opinion? What's happening in Mexico? Hello, Alberto. Hello to all my colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the foundation for organizing this very important meeting. Alberto, when we talk about the coverage of migration, it's very interesting what Monica has just mentioned. It changes the composition of the people who are trying to move towards the north. And the territorial composition changes. Also, the routes also is on high compared to others. Also, what happens, the cities where the migration is overcrowding, that is, let's say, the large observatories, when we talk about migratory phenomenon, these are transforming also the map of the organized crime, that conditions not only the routes, but also the transit conditions and also the type of engagement of the organized crime faced with migration. I remember a few years back the terrible things that happened with the migrants and the way that the Zetas had discovered that migrants, undocumented migrants, as a business for them. But it's really very important to highlight the migratory coverage as a political phenomenon and a reality and political transformation, the composition of migration. Moreover, what Monica has mentioned, they say things regarding the countries where these people come from, and it has normally a political content. They're escaping from the narratives, from the propaganda that are proper to each region or country. The way in which the migratory flow is composed, in a way it's increasing or not, as a journalist, invites us and really leads us to ask a question, a fundamental one. What is happening in the regions? Uh, what is really happening in the regions where the migrants come from? For example, how can we see the political transits the political stridencies in this amount of humans that are overcrowded, traveling, going up and down, asking or not asking, permits, legal permits, overcrowded in the borders. These are a political discourse, very deep one, that that does not admit a lot of use. And let's say that I'm sorry, we're having connection problems. So what does the composition tell us in the terms of the politics of what the people are, what they are, and where they coming from? It's very interesting what Carlos was mentioning, because the composition of the people that go through Mexico has changed a lot since until 2010. More than 20% of the people detained in Mexico were being maintained. In the United States were Mexican. Between 10 and 20, this is the Central America population that is 50% of the people detained in the border with the United States. Now, today, the last data says that more than 60% of those detained come from the the countries, South America, but also from Russia, China, and other countries from Africa. So this composition has really changed. I would like to hand the floor to Cindy so she can answer the question. Cindy, welcome and thank you very much. Thank you very much for your invitation. Aligned with the conversation and what Carlos was just mentioning, I do think that migration in Nicaragua has been very precise, conductant, when it says to why people leave their origin country. In this case, the exodus without precedence in the past 5 years is product of an authoritarian government, the Ortega Murillo regime, and its his repression, and also of the economic consequences that this implies. A country in which the population, without considering their political origin, they are really going towards Costa Rica and towards the United States. The case of Nicaragua is interesting because we have a historical immigration before 2018 due to natural disaster, political instability, and lack of opportunities. We were talking about 600,000 people from Nicaragua that had left. But from 2018 up to date, we've seen the exodus, and we're talking about 700 people. That's a huge amount of people for a small country like Nicaragua. So the media in Nicaragua, the coverage of migration in a consistent way is really new, because before that, we did not have a lot of connection with historical migration. There were some very specific articles, but it happens that during these past years, we've seen a pattern when we talk about the North Triangle, Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and how migrant people are facing a very difficult migration route through Mexico. So we begin to see a coverage of those strategies, of that crisis that is completely new for us. I remember that when I was little, I saw those types of news in Telemundo or Univision, but not the coverage in the Nicaraguan media. So this is on a daily basis. We are focused on telling those stories, those crises, and we also tell the causes that have to do with the political aspect, economic aspect too. And I do think that now, in the past year, we are focused on what the governments are doing. How are they responding to this massive migration, specifically from Nicaragua, Cuba, Haiti, that we've seen that really are containing, let's say, the migration, as the authorities have said. And we are maybe we are a little bit behind what the decisions of the governments are. But I do think that it's important that it has been humanized, that human mass that is moving because they don't have any options. Thank you very much, Cindy. Yes, the news coverage in migration has ethical challenges, the causes that make people move, why they leave, to leave out poverty, violence. These are elements, also the climate change and political pressures and the effects of authoritarian governments. This, as journalists, will really give us some challenges. How can we represent the people who are in transit? How can we protect their safety? And how can we protect also ourselves? So, Cindy, what are recommendations that you will do to your colleagues that cover these migration topics? What are the recommendations regarding safety, ethics, and representation of the migrant people? Regarding safety,
Alberto, si Cindy tiene
I'm
problemas con la
sorry, I think
conexión,
we're having technical
si quiere
difficulties.
pasamos con otro panelista mientras que Cindy puede volver a
Let's go on
conectarse.
to another panelist while Cindy can solve her technical problems. Monica, could you answer the question regarding ethics, recommendations that you would give your colleagues for those colleagues that work on these aspects? One of the things that we can advance in order to really approach this context, the migration in the continent, is to, let's say, to do a zoom out of the context, not only to see the people in transit, but also the territories. There was a very important positive aspect when mobility started in Southern Cone because it opened the space to a visibility. Because we were talking about the Darien, specifically that Darien Gap, where a lot of people are dying. So in this sense, the context will enable us to furthermore do a research on the transit or why people are leaving their countries, where the territory, and this will also help in the practice to the people is doing those routes. What is the territory they're confronting? We're talking about in Mexico and extending towards Guatemala. How can we see the hostile authorities and the criminal groups, as Carlos mentioned? So they are facing a territory because the routes, as Carlos mentioned, are very dangerous in order, but they are using to avoid surveillance. So, but the legal steps are also being an obstacle because there's a lot of people waiting for a long time, overcrowded in camps and shelters. So all the contents that can be done in the case of Mexico and Central America on the territory regarding what is a new route to discover these type of hostile situations that can be presented. And also there is something that has, well, helped for me, and it's a new research done by my colleagues and APV Verificado regarding misinformation. I think it was a very important work who was really giving the information to transit the routes. So this is important to understand what is being said and what are the concepts that are being shared in the social network with with really the lies. So it's a real trap. I think this research is very important to really understand how the information is being transformed because migratory politics are changing according to the territory. Thank you very much, Monica. Yes, Carlos. What are advices that you could give to your colleagues and to our colleagues in case of migration? This is changing. We have to protect the sources and ourselves. This is a very complex question, but regarding Monica was saying, understanding the coverage of the migration and phenomena of migration is a media coverage that depends on the media. Well, they have to put that interest in this aspect. I'm not thinking only the coverage that one reporter can do, interested in the topic, but what I could understand, the journals, the mass media should place their eyes on the fact that this is a phenomena that requires constant coverage, requires specialized teams, and also to have the possibility to compare and to have a historical notion of the mutation of the routes. But I think it's also very important, and regarding the idea of Zoom that Monica was saying, is also to have to have the capacity to understand this phenomena from different perspectives. As the reporters have the duty to accompany the routes, to testify the routes, to really understand that the route is never the official route. To really sense these routes, to see them. So we have to accompany them in the Darien Gap, in La Bestia in Mexico. We have to go directly in those routes. On the other hand, it's very important to take out of that Zoom that what happened at the beginning. It's very important that to consider these people come from a place where something is happening, and also the act of leaving the country, sometimes waiting, not expecting not to come back, has a radical act of frustration, but also of hope. So the acknowledgement of the places where these people come from, that they go in the trains, that they die, that they go through the forest, that they are captured. It's very important in order to understand in its totality what is happening. And third, I do think that it's a third level of Zoom. How can I articulate the migratory phenomenon among the countries that have that problem? Alberto said it clearly. The bullying that how President Trump had the first will of López Obrador and imposed the need to convert with new hues to convert Mexico as a border for Central Americans. And after that, the North Americans under Biden administration had visited Guatemala to say that we had visited Central America with a very clear idea of that the Vice President Harris said, don't come here, we don't want you here. And if you are coming here, we are going to deport you. So these are the very overwhelming messages that the presidency has sent to Central America. The possibility of having different readings from the territory, the forest, until the political reality links the countries and defines the political relations among the countries. This is part of our migratory coverage, and we can understand it only if we can access to those three levels, at least if we try to do an effort to access the different Zoom levels.
La conexión con Cindy, por favor.
Okay, we have Cindy back. Cindy, can you answer the question? Yes, thank you so much. Regarding what colleagues have mentioned, it's important to consider that at the moment when we accompany these travel that is so dangerous, to have the possibility to talk with the migrants in that moment when they're going through that difficult path or that difficult journey due to the emotion of having the image, the character, the story. Maybe we do not consider seriously the assessment of risk for that person. In that moment, that person, when he or she is traveling, maybe that person will not have a very clear idea of what implies of talking to a journalist. And it also makes a catharsis with the media. I'm not saying in a sense of reducing the autonomy in the decision making, what they want to tell or not, but the journalist has a better idea and he's in a better position to confirm with the person if this can be said or not, a detail that can imply a risk for that person, for their families too, that are stay at home, like in Nicaragua, that migration is due to a political persecution. So we cannot forget that when we are in the territory, we have to be very careful. And another thing is related to safety. For us as reporters, I do think that it's important to do a research, a previous research, very thorough one, and we can find key actors that can guide us in the route that we really thank that contribution. We talk about fixers or facilitators too. These are very important people to really go to the borders. The many times are very dangerous. The borders between Mexico and the United States, and also Costa Rica-Nicaragua border is also very dangerous due to the implications of drug trafficking in the mobilization of migrants. And also we have to be careful with that, to trust things that can be done or not. It's better to be sure. So we have to be very careful when we do and make those interviews. Thank you very much, Cindy. It's very interesting because this debate among the visibility that we give to the migrants and the fact that this is not a mass, they're human beings with names and surnames in the stories, and the context in political situations. So I remember that recently in the 2018 caravan, when a woman was stigmatized by saying that she didn't want to food and she was stigmatized. And a story was used to convert her into the symbol of racism in Central America, against the people in Central America. So there we see the relevance that the narrative that we have from our perspective as journalists in Mexico, for example, the government says that it rescues migrants when in fact it detains them. They say that they give some shelters, but it's not true. And it's assisted return home, but really, in fact, they are being deported. So this is very important when we understand what are the narratives behind the media. And with that, I would like to ask the following question. First of all, to Carlos, how do you analyze the media coverage done by the migrants in the media? And do you consider that there have been changes recently in the approach of this topic? Carlos, you have the floor. There has been important changes in this approach in migration phenomena, obviously. Depending on the period of time when my brother Oscar went to Mexico in 2007 or 2008, the journalist approach regarding migration was eventually when the cyclics, the migrant massacres, or a lot of people died due to an accident in a train, or when there was a success case. Listen, there's a person without no papers now, he's working in New York. So going through the complexity of the media coverage in that path where there was a lot of misinformation and that reduced the migrants to people suffering violence and without asking the involvement of the Mexican state or the involvement of that group that was a criminal group, migrant national institute, and all the police in Mexico. We have seen an evolution in the media coverage of this phenomena. And I do think that saving the horrors that Monica was mentioning, with a lot of misinformation, stigma, and also lies, I do think that the media has understood the complexity of the phenomenon. And in general terms, since 2007 up to date, we have seen an evolution, and there has been a deep change in a way the journalists and the media have understood a phenomenon that is completely linked with everything that talks about corruption, drug trafficking, economies, democracies of the governments, and also show the terrible things of the politics. I do think that the media have the memory. Once the United States pronounced the migrant caravan from 2018 like a terrible thing, like those people who are going to come to our borders, but somebody reminded, but you really backed the coup d'etat. And then also there was a lot of drug trafficking behind that, and that's what we know as the caravans today. So I do think that there is a lot of media and much more journalists with the capacity or the interest of having a complex view on the phenomenon. Obviously, there are the constant irresponsibilities or superficialities in which many journalists or media will be, but I dare to say that the misinformation is not necessarily innocent, a product of mediocrity. No, I do think that misinformation is other component that we have to pay attention to because it has intentions. It's lying in a precise order or stigmatizing in a specialized order that is also aligned with the political discourse of governors, of presidents, or different blocs inside the United States, in Central America and Mexico. So farther from being afraid of those lies, I do think that it's very important to be placed in this coverage radar. And I do think this is being done. So my view is optimism regarding how my colleagues and the media and us as journalists have been able to understand that this is a multi-dynamical phenomenon, multi-causal phenomenon that implies an intellectual task when we have to approach it.
Sí, gracias, Carlos. Ahora voy a dar la palabra a Mónica, si puede añadir a lo que...
Monica, would you like to answer the question? I do think that you mentioned the recent accidents and the murders that have taken place in the Mexican territory. It's important to not normalize, as journalists, that. I think this happened. I covered it. That's it. Another massacre, another accident, another overcrowding, another fire. So is to place always the vision on the visibility of the terrible things that are happening. So we have to continue to understand the brutality that is given to the community. Mexico is a very racist country, so we are having a severity due to the context of overcrowding, of the shelters, of the refugees. So this is something that we have to explore in order to tackle. And one of the things, based on my experience, that I lived, is misinformation that was born from the government. It was explosion with the Trump government. So you would see, let's say, in the Guatemalan forest, somebody saying, we are opening the access, Trump have opened the access, so women with children come in. So that would benefit only the people who were charging for that transit illegally. So a lot of people thought that it was real. And once they arrived to the borders, they started to live with and see the deportation. Now the borders are opened, that we can give you a lawyer, we give you an opportunity to transit through Mexico with the legal documents, to all these misinformation traps that furthermore, migration is a macroeconomics where all the countries are embedded. So from the taxi driver, and also the people that we saw, for example, Oscar and Oscar's brother and me, that they would sell a kit with tenets antidote for animals. So that macroeconomics, this is being exploited throughout the Mexican territory. So we cannot trust anybody. Everybody and the people who are in transit through Mexico are feeling very sad. And this is due to that lack of trust, mistrust. This is one of the things we have to approach. And regarding what Cindy said, like people are discovering violence and brutality and massacre, when we accompany them, we have to be very careful as journalists. We have to back them up, okay, during their transit, because many times, due to that idea of continuing the route of discovering a lot of things, we lose notion of that the fact that we are dealing with people that are involved with organized crime. I'm talking about the institution, I'm talking about institution, governments, populations, and we are entering in that unknown dimension where people think and that we are a focus. No, that we are a flashlight, always looking to see what is being done uh, uh, badly. So the police forces in Mexico is one of the worst things that we have. Thank you very much, Monica. Cindy, you had the floor. I'm very optimistic regarding how the media coverage has changed in the media in Nicaragua and Costa Rica, which has been my experience. I've seen that evolution. Obviously, due to this situation, let's say that before we did not have that situation in migrant ethnics. This recently appeared. So we saw it. There's other media that came also to the situation, and and they become to covered. Another thing that happened is the state repression that exiled more than 200 colleagues from the exile they were saying what was happening in Nicaragua, but there are a lot of stories behind that. So this has been good in a sense, and I do think that has been a very important effort in humanizing to stay away from that caricature that my colleague was mentioning regarding the migration is very romantic. If you're going to tell those stories of the people that are in Costa Rica or in Spain and United States, we should do it with intersectional focus in which we can see that there are certain features that define the lives of the people, that the circumstances around them. And obviously, talking about these stories, we always have to have the macro lens that enables us to see what's happening in that community where the migrants live, and at the same time to do a zoom out to really understand the realities of the countries, the governments, what are they doing, how they are seeing the migrations and what measures they're taking. I do think there's a lag in the case of Costa Rica, that there are some traditional media, they use nationality when they talk about a crime, talking about committed by a Nicaraguan. And this has repercussions. And also the president of Costa Rica, who is insisting on the fact that that the migrants is a burden. Unfortunately, there's no media coverage that is consistent in this mainstream media in Costa Rica. That is a reflection of that, how the society in Costa Rica is not perceived as a whole together with us, the Nicaraguan migrants that are the majority. They're seeing like the ticos and the ticas are Costa Ricans, and afterwards we have the migrants. But at the end of the day, we're all inhabitants and will impact in the same way what's happening in the country. So this happens also in Mexico and other states that are receiving a lot of immigrants. So in this sense, we are still in debt, but I'm very pleased to see that there's an emphasis and also realities in collaboration among the colleagues in the media that are trying to really understand the complexity of this phenomenon.
Muchas gracias, Cindy.
Thank you very much, Cindy.
Antes de dar la palabra a
Before handing the floor to Jessica
para pasar con las preguntas del público, sí que quería resumir un
to
poco
answer the audience's questions,
conversación que estamos
I would like to
manteniendo
say that this
y efectivamente
conversation,
cuatro consejos que se pueden dar para estar un poco
I
alerta.
can
Creo que
really
ha hablado de las expectativas, no caer en la
talk about
caricatura, cuidar a las personas
the
que vienen,
caricature,
ser
take care of the
tolerantes,
migrant people, but
con la
treat them well,
ética,
understand their
pedir
problems, to understand where they come from, what are the causes they're
si
leaving their
vuelvan a
countries,
ponerse en la ruta
why
unilateral.
are they
Muchas
going
veces
through that
pasa
path?
que
Because nobody wants to leave everything behind
poderoso
if it's not due to a
una
powerful
tercera
motive.
sería
And
de
the third
confiar,
idea would
confiar en las autoridades y desconfiar
to
también
not
de
trust the
los
authorities
agentes interesados
and the
en la
agents'
información que
interest
llega
in the information that
para
comes
hacer una
uh,
para
for them, for example, that information to give it
difundir mensajes negativas y por último, y creo que
to
sería la más importante, en la que hemos
really
puesto énfasis creo que
spotlight on the
en todo
narratives.
momento,
And the
es
last
poder
one
hablar,
is to go directly to the
preguntar
territorial.
y acompañar
So to
a las
ask them,
personas que llegan
accompany
por esta vía
women, men that are in transit,
directamente, es decir,
going
yo
through
creo que no hay
those
mejor
routes.
receta
There
para
is not a
comprender
better recipe really
la
to
migración
understand
que,
the migration in that sense,
realizar
to really
el trayecto
go through
acompañando
that
y
path,
preguntar,
accompany them,
preguntar,
ask
seguir
them,
preguntando.
always ask them,
Espero
and
que
keep on asking the
bueno, pues con
questions.
esto iría
So
dando ya paso a las
with this,
preguntas
I would like to
del público y
see who
paso
wants
a
to answer
Jessica,
the
Jessica
questions that are
que va a
in the
empezar a
chat,
formular.
and Jessica is going to read them out loud. Thank you very much, Alberto, Mónica, Carlos, and Cindy. The first question is from Luisa Costa. How to understand that some governments want to minimize the migratory crisis, avoiding to show the migrants.
Alberto, si quieres, adelante,
Alberto,
inicias, está silenciado y luego hacemos una ronda con cada uno de los panelistas.
Sí, pues realmente creo que lo principal es, como platicaba antes, que
The most important thing is that we cannot trust the governments, the official narrative. We cannot trust that because, in general, it minimizes who have people that are fleeing from their countries to ignore the violence problems, the hunger problems, and also authoritarianism problems, but also those are who puts the spotlight on the racist aspects, saying it's an invasion, a public security, saying it's a racist problem. So it's important to really not trust and to talk with people who are in transit and the men and women who are on route. And with that, I would like to hand the floor to Cindy. Yes, this is the case of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua and its propaganda media and his discourses. Once or twice has mentioned migration, even though, as I said before, it's an unprecedented exodus, including people from his own political party and people who work for the state. At the end of the day, it mentions that just to make United States guilty as part of his rhetoric. It's very important that the media should be ready really to refute that is being said by the authorities, because many times we fall simply on the fact of uh, saying this is what happened and that's it. So at the end of the day, it's just we're only telling part of the story without understanding the reality and showing what is really happening. And there's a huge information that says that it's not as it's being said. As also in the case of Costa Rica, I do think the rhetoric is saying that the migrants are a burden, and this is why we had a series of problems in the country. So, and the media has to be really very aware of what's happening and really show the what's happening. Yes, there's a cost on behalf of the state to give education to children, or also that they have to attend in the healthcare centers, but that's not all. It's those migrants are also contributing to the economy, and they contribute more than what they're receiving. So it's always important to refute when once it's so obvious that the authorities are saying that has a hue and really they're not showing the real reality. Thank you very much, Cindy. The second question is by Clodomir Sanchez. How is the climate change leading to that migration? Does solutions in media work in that sense?
Sí, si quieres, Mónica,
Monica?
apuntar algo en este sentido.
Sí, bueno, o sea, básicamente lo que estamos viendo es
What we're
mucho,
seeing
mucha gente en movilidad por el contexto del cambio
is
climático
mobility due to also
y esto pues
climate
genera
change
muchísimos desastres naturales, ¿no?
that leads to a
Esto
lot of
desafortunadamente
natural disasters.
ha ido y además va a seguir empeorando
It
con
will
el periodo
continue
seco.
to
Por
worsen.
ejemplo, el corredor seco en
Also, when we
Honduras,
talk about
poco se
the
come
dry corridor in
mar, casi
Honduras,
peces
there are
que
no more fish in this,
en los
so
océanos.
they're in the
Entonces, todas
oceans.
las comunidades
So all the
empiezan a perder
communities are
prácticamente
being
ya no tiene
dissolved.
otra más que hacer
People
una
don't
migración.
have
Primero,
other
la
option
migración y
to
después
do a
adaptarse
migration
hacia la migración
internally,
hacia
first of all, and
Centroamérica.
then towards
Y creo
United
que
States and
otro,
Canada. So I do
creo que el
think
periodismo
that
de soluciones es un gran
solution
instrumento, una
journalism
gran herramienta para
is a very
poder
important tool
contrarrestar
to
y ser un
counteract that
poco,
situation and to
como
be,
decían mis colegas
as my
Cindy y
colleagues
Carlos,
said,
¿no? Que no seamos tan
that
pesimistas
to be not as pessimist in the process. We have to try to take that situation, adverse situation in mobility, and learn from the experience of other continents in order to not do it the same way. I once asked if Mexico was going to become scenes that we've seen in Africa, or in these scenarios in refugee camps, so strong scenes. And basically, we are going to be in a country having that scenario. Really, this changes and has to be dealt. The landscape changes, and we have to understand there are other means, and the public policies should be. We should learn. We should learn from those huge mistakes regarding the context of other continents. So it's fundamental, really, to understand that children are migrating, women are migrating, and whole families. There were things that we didn't see before, or that really this situation. If we show in territory, I remember when I was going through Altar, it was a road where you could see dead cows and everything. So it's important to show the people this terror road. So with this type of journalism, different one, we should tell the stories, success stories, but without really showing everything tragic. We have to show hopeful process to not only showing terror, like in that desert, that's telling them that everybody's going to die, and that also this is going to be a terrible situation. It's important to tell them that it's going to be a transit, a difficult one. I would like to say, Alberto, that in this case, talking about climate change, it's very obvious and urgent, the intersectionality of what Cindy was saying, because the media coverage that we do, when linked, can lead us landscape. There are people specialized in climate change for the crops, for the land, how this deepens the conflicts. What happened is that while the climate change is happening, there are also political phenomena. There's still organized crime. And that is why, to highlight this topic, climate change is linked to everything else, to the economy, therefore the migrations, therefore political fact, political discourse, and exchange. So the coverage, media coverage of climate change and has its different consequences of the migration with its different effects, but also different causes. And this is a topic that summons the reporters to open up the Zoom and to connect with journalists who have their view on other coverage specialists, but without a doubt affects our societies in different scopes. Migration is one of the byproducts of everything's happening in the countries. If the democracy is destroyed, if climate change and the sea levels will disappear in Ireland in the Caribbean, if this leads to the fact that the crops are going to be very poor without the capacity to feed a country, or certain populations will have immediate consequence, and migration is one of those immediate consequences. So therefore, it's very important for those who cover these topics to have the capacity to trace the consequences of something, or to be able to explain certain phenomena with all the causes. Climate change, obviously, we can see it clearly in Central America. It's a very vulnerable region. It's happening. And it's going to be one of the aspects in which we have to tackle very seriously and with a lot of persistence.
Gracias, Carlos.
Thank you very much,
Una pregunta
Carlos.
de
One more
Ricardo
question
Peña.
from Ricardo Peña.
¿Qué recomendaciones
What are
nos da
recommendations
para
that you could give
generar
us
confianza a la
to
hora de
be able to generate
entrevistar a
trust
más migrantes?
when we
Luego
interview
de
migrant
espacios en
people?
los que las personas
We're in
tienen
spaces where
necesidades
people
amplias
have
relacionadas con
very important needs in that process.
Alberto y Cindy.
Alberto,
Sí, bueno,
Cindy?
yo creo que nuevamente me voy a repetir en lo que estábamos platicando antes.
I'm
Es
going to repeat
fundamental
myself. This
estar
is
ahí,
fundamental to
apoyar,
be there, to spend time together, accompany them,
y luego tener un respeto absoluto
and
por las
also have
condiciones
to
de dolor, las
respect
condiciones de
for the
necesidad,
pain
y no
conditions and
presionar,
needs that the people
no
have.
presionar,
We cannot pressure them.
no buscar
No, we should
una
not
nota por encima de eso,
seek to
porque
have an
tenemos que recordar
article
que somos seres
in
humanos,
news, because we have to remember that we are human
una
beings
increíble como
working
seres
with
humanos.
wonderful
Eso
prime-material
una
human
empatía,
beings,
una
and we have to have empathy, and we have to accompany them.
caricaturizar y no tratar como una
Do not
persona
treat the
de menor
people,
edad, es decir, las personas que hablan de
let's
la
say, like
depresión, de contar
children.
sus historias, somos
Those who
sujetos de derecho
tell
que
their
tenemos
story,
derecho a
they
nuestras
are
propias decisiones.
subjects that
Y
have their own
esa
rights
empatía
and their own
y esa visibilidad
decisions.
viene con rostros y con nombres y apellidos
And this
que
visibility comes with
siempre hay que
faces
considerar
and names.
las condiciones que están
So
detrás.
always
Es simplemente escuchar,
considering their
estar,
stories. So we
acompañar.
have to be there, accompany them.
Bueno, pues es la parte fundamental del periodismo, que salir a la calle
This
a
is
contar.
part of the journalism, to tell the
Cindy,
stories.
por favor.
Cindy?
Sí, Alberto, yo coincido porque
Yes,
me parece que
Alberto,
este
I
tipo
do
de
agree.
coberturas no pueden ser
These type
temporales
of
en el
coverage
tiempo.
cannot be
Difícilmente
entry
vas a conseguir
and
una buena
coming and
historia,
out.
vas a conseguir
It's very
que las
difficult to
personas
have a good
migrantes se
story,
acerquen con
and the
confianza y
migrants
cuenten
will
esa
have
historia.
trust
Sí
and
se
tell their
necesita
story.
tiempo de realmente estar presente
We have
en
to
el
be
lugar,
present.
de observar, de acercarse con
We
mucho
have to observe
respeto.
them, approach them with a lot of
Y
respect.
yo creo que es muy importante y funciona muy bien porque así debe ser con todas
This
las
is the way it's
coberturas.
going to work very
Explicar
well.
qué es lo que
We have to
necesitas ante el periodista,
explain
por qué
what
importa
do you
que
need
esa
as a journalist,
persona
what's
explique
important
su
that
historia.
people, that
Muchas veces yo
person,
creo que las
to tell us
fuentes,
the
por ejemplo,
story.
cuando están en esas
Sometimes the
circunstancias,
sources, when they're
van a
under
decir, bueno,
those
¿qué va a
situations,
mí,
they're going to say,
en qué me afecta o por qué
how
me
is
va a
going to
beneficiar
affect me
quedarme el
or
tiempo en que yo cuente mi
benefit
historia? Algunas
if
personas, como
I
decía
tell
antes,
the story?
tienen una disposición
There
de
are the
hacer una
people that
especie
are
de
willing
catarsis
to
delante
do
de
a
una persona, pero eso
catharsis,
es muy válido.
but
Y
there
yo
are
creo
other
que
people that
el
don't want to
punto
speak.
es ser muy
And
claros
part
de
of
qué
that
es lo
respect
que
is to be very clear.
buscamos como
What
periodistas,
we
que es
seek
dar
as
visibilidad a un
journalists to give
fenómeno, a la
visibility to a
historia, cuál es la
phenomena, to the
historia de
story,
esa persona en
why that
particular que es
story is
importante
specific, is important
para tu trabajo.
really for your work.
Y bueno, aquí la pregunta lleva una cola que me parece que
And
es importante mencionar, que eso
it's
de
important
ese
to
dilema
mention
ético,
that
donde hay personas que
ethical
tienen
dilemma
mucha
where there are a lot
necesidad
of people
de
with a lot of
servicios humanitarios,
needs
¿no? Y
in
muchas veces el
humanitarian
acceso a
aspects, basic needs like food,
alimentación, agua, un espacio digno, etcétera. Esa
water.
parte es difícil, sin
That
duda
part
alguna,
is
porque las
very, very
personas
difficult because
muchas veces
people many
te hablan,
times
pero
tell
también
you
al
the
mismo tiempo
stories, but at the same time,
te dicen que
they
necesitan
say
otras
they
cosas.
need these things.
Esa
And
parte
it's very
es
difficult for
más
journalists
humano
because
como
we're all
ético.
human
Y yo creo que
beings.
ahí también hay que ser muy claros con la
So we
persona
have
y
to be very
manejar
clear with that
expectativas
person to
por qué
manage
estamos
those
ahí y cuál
expectations,
es
why
nuestro
we're
rol
there, what
y
is
qué
our
podemos
role,
satisfacer
and
esas
that we cannot
necesidades.
really
Y si
fulfill
no,
their
lo otro
needs.
que yo he hecho
And
es
that's
se
what I've
puede
done.
proporcionar
But we
información un
can
poco
give them
accesible a
information
dónde pueden
regarding
recurrir
where they
para
can go
encontrar esos
to
servicios.
find what
Y eso es
their
bueno
basic
también
needs are
el tema
fulfilled. That has to
de
do
que
with
incluso
ethics,
personas que
because
están en situaciones
people
muy,
who
muy
are
difíciles,
under
pues también
very
dicen,
difficult
sí, bueno, puedo
situations,
hablar, pero
they
si
can
me
say, yes, I
dicen tal
can
cosa, ¿verdad?
tell you
Y
something, but
cuáles
if
otros
you give
servicios
me
son
this or that,
proporcionables y es
this is
finalmente
a
nadie es algo
situation
que no
that
queremos ver.
in which we won't want to see ourselves in.
Gracias, Cindy. No sé si
Thank you very much,
Mónica y
Cindy,
Carlos tienen
Monica,
alguna pregunta
Carlos.
sobre esta pregunta.
Bueno, pues yo sí específicamente me inclino por
Yes,
no hacer
I
promesas, ¿no? O
do
sea,
make
ir
promises,
es
really,
como la
to
mejor
the migrants.
inversión.
That's the best
Nosotros
option.
tenemos muchos conocimientos
We
sobre
have a lot of knowledge
el
of
tránsito, si es que ya
how the
tenemos algo
transit
como
is,
hecho. Y también tenemos mucho conocimiento de
and
quiénes sí
we
nos van
know
a ayudar
really
de manera
who
seria, qué
can really
organizaciones,
help,
o en el
what
caso de México,
organizations. In the
algunos
case
espacios
in Mexico,
excelentes
shelters
para
or
tenerlo.
spaces that are
Eso
very good
sobre
for them,
todo
and we can share that
ciertos
information with them.
lugares no confiar.
And also we
Entonces,
tell them
básicamente es
where
como
they shouldn't go
estamos ahí,
and
pero
shouldn't
de
trust, where people they
manera
shouldn't trust.
paralela,
So
¿no? Para
we are
caminar de
there
un lado. Tampoco
accompanying
podemos
them side by
definir el
side. We
análisis de
cannot
las personas
define or
ni
affect their
poder
decisions,
hacer una
and
injerencia
we
en
cannot
solo sugerir, ¿no?
make decisions for
Tomar las
them. We
decisiones,
only
pero
just give
sí podemos
suggestions,
alertar.
but we
Creo que
can
eso es
give
importante,
alerts, yes,
¿no?
and I think that is very
Hablando
important.
del caso, por ejemplo, de lo
Specifically
que es
in the
México,
case of the territory of
que es
Mexico,
como grave.
which is
La
very
otra es,
difficult.
pues, la gente en movilidad necesita
And
muchas
people
cosas.
in
No creo que
mobility
tampoco
needs a
uno
lot of
diga nada más
things.
hacer,
So
¿no? O
we
sea,
can
ir,
also
acompañar y
also
estar
give, accompany
durante ese
them,
tiempo
and accompanying
juntos,
them, and giving them
sin
support
esta promesa, ¿no? Sin
without that
comprometernos a
promise,
algo
without
específico, porque luego
committing to
hacemos
give them other
mucho
things, because it
el
can be really
tener
dangerous
la
of having
responsabilidad
that
de
responsibility
decir cosas con tal de
to
tener
saying things in order to
y
give,
no.
to receive
Yo
information.
trabajo, por ejemplo, con
So I
imagen,
work
entonces
with
todo esto
Imagine, so
tipo de
it's very
acercamiento,
difficult,
creo
that
que
approach,
definitivamente es el tiempo que le
and
puedas dedicar
it's the
a
time that
a
you
tus trabajos.
can really give to
Estar
the work
en
and to be
México
there.
no es una cosa de un día, ¿no?
It's not
Son
a
muchos
job of
días
a one-day
y
job.
la
These
constancia
are
de estar
trips, and we have
a
to
la
be very
gente
constant,
para que
accompanying the
puedan
people,
poco a
to
poco
be
empezar a ver
able to
ese
have
cambio.
that approach, that relationship with them. Yes, I think it's been very well defined. When we accompany the people who are migrating without documents, we are portraying a group of people under a lot of vulnerability, and in a circumstance in which they are victims that are not going to report. These are people that are not willing to seek the actions of the authorities because they find themselves, let's say, they don't have any documents, legal documents with them. So be aware of the moment when we approach these people is key. And I think Cindy very well defined it. It's not a coverage, media coverage to go in and out. I'll go 8 o'clock in the morning, just do 3 interviews, and we're ready for the edition of tomorrow. No, because these types of speed or rhythm we leads us to have 2 or 3 interviews without the possibilities of verification, of contrasting that information, and furthermore with the possibility of what really was behind that information. There are a lot of risks doing journalism on a one-day basis and really gathering phrases, because it will not reflect the reality of a human beings that are living that situation. And on the other hand, when we make when we make the situation much complex, we run the risk of really misunderstanding the people. Human beings are very complex with very complex realities, and it changes regarding the situation. Many of these migrants, once they were the bullies. But this specifically, when they're migrating, they have a very complex situation. But it's our task also to make it more complex and define dimensions to the migrants, instead of make them only objects prone to external actions. They made a decision, for example. I couldn't imagine making those decisions, but these decisions implied a lot of things, and that maybe we are interviewing them when they're more aware of the consequences of their decision. So I would summarize that in when you have to be very aware of the conditions the people are living at that moment, and never, never lose sight that we are talking with the prime material. As Alberto said, it's very complex. It's a human being that made a decision, that comes from where it's coming, has the illusion to go to another place, has their own realities. In this sense, it's our responsibility to really portray human beings in its all complexity in a moment and a specific context.
Muchísimas gracias, Carlos.
Thank you very much,
Vamos
Carlos.
dando paso a la última palabra, la última idea. Les voy a pedir, por favor, que sean breves, concisos.
I would like to
Para no
ask
alargarnos
you
demasiado.
just
Entonces,
one final question
Cindy, Mónica,
before
Carlos,
we end this
una última idea,
meeting.
un mensaje que os parezca importante.
One last
Cindy,
message
te la
you
paso a
would
ti primero.
like to share, Cindy?
Gracias, Alberto. Bueno, no,
Thank you very
solamente
much,
agradecer el
Alberto.
espacio
No,
de
I'd like to
Fundación y
thank
de
la
verdad
Fundación
para
Gabo.
mí es muy emocionante
For
ver
me,
cómo
it's
la
so
cobertura de la
important to
migración
see how
pues
the
en el
media
caso
coverage
de
of
América
migration, in the
Latina o
case
de
of the media in
América
Nicaragua
Centroamérica,
and
pues
Costa
ha
Rica,
tenido un auge importante.
have been on high, and
Mis colegas muy interesados en
the
tener
colleagues are
este
very
espacio
interested
para
to having these
precisamente
spaces in
poder
order
tener unos
to
ratitos en medio
have a little
de
space in the middle
la
of
rutina y
this
al
media
día a día,
coverage
las
on a
tareas
day-to-day basis in the
diarias
agenda,
sobre lo
and
que
to
estamos haciendo
reflect
bien y
on what
sobre
we're
lo que
doing
estamos
well
haciendo
and what
también
we're not
sobre lo que
doing as
podemos
well, and also what's
potenciar. ¿Cuáles
lacking.
son esos espacios que hay
So
que
which
cubrir?
are
Y hay una
these
frase
spaces
que
that we
me
have to cover?
gusta
There's a
repetir, y
phrase
es que
that I like to
el
repeat, and
periodismo de
it's
investigación, por
journalism,
ejemplo, se asocia
research
mucho
journalism
a
is
a trabajar
linked
casos de
to
corrupción, por
uh,
ejemplo, de los gobiernos, etcétera.
unveiling
Yo creo
these
que
corruption
también hay
cases,
que
but
darle ese
also
mismo, atribuirle ese
we
mismo
should
sentido
grant
a
the
cuáles son
same
esas
idea of
poblaciones que
what
no
are
estamos
these
cubriendo
populations that we are
de
not
la mejor
covering
manera, que es
in the
de
best
manera
way.
consistente,
That should be
profunda, digna
consistent, in depth,
y digna, ¿no?
and
Así
very
que,
complex.
nada, muchísimas gracias por
So
permitirnos
thank you very
conocer nuestra
much
presencia.
for enabling this space for this reflection.
Mónica.
Monica,
Sí, pues yo específicamente creo que lo que nos ha funcionado
what
muchísimo
has
es
worked for us
crear estos grupos de investigación,
is
¿no?
having these
Donde podamos
research
reunir
groups in
expertas
which
de diferentes territorios
when we
para
can
poder
follow different
guiarnos
routes in the
esa
territory.
es como una de las recomendaciones que más
This
ha
is
dado
the
frutos
recommendation that has really given
para poder investigar
answers in
estos
order to
contextos.
investigate the spaces and the context.
Creo que también tenemos que empezar a darnos
We should start
un espacio
to give
para
us a
reflexionar
space to
cómo
reflect
o cuál va a ser la adversidad que podamos
on
llegar
what
a
are the
tener, porque
difficulties that we may have
Estados
because
Unidos ya no está
United States
accediendo o no
is not
está dispuesto
receiving or it's not
a seguir
willing
siendo
to
este país
continue
seguro,
being
¿no?
this
Entonces,
country where
para
it's receiving the
mucho más
immigrants. So
grande
we're going to have
y
very
además el
difficult
costo se va a
conflicts.
elevar,
And
¿no?
also the costs are going to increase for
La
those who
movilidad
want
también tiende a
to
afectar
to travel. So this is going to
tarde o
generate
temprano,
a
¿no?
collapse
Entre nuestros
sooner or later among our governments
tipificaciones que
and our
tenemos, las
typifications, our
especificaciones,
features that we have.
pues sí
So
es importante
it's
eso, como
important really
aconsejarnos
to
la
really
seguridad, ¿no?
give
Que
us
podamos tener
advice on regarding
socialmente
security,
confiar,
safety
creo que es
when we
importante
travel, as
y
Cindy
pues
mentioned,
como
and also
algo básico es
the basic advice
crear
of
grupos de colectiva para
creating
poder seguir
these
investigando
teams
las
to
migraciones.
continue doing this
Algo
investigation
que
in
yo
a
sí
secure way.
quisiera, y también lo mencionó
Now,
Carlos, es también
Carlos mentioned
verificar,
something
¿no?
regarding
Estamos ante
verification.
un nivel
We
altísimo
are
de desinformación
facing
y
of
mucha
misinformation,
inmovilización
and many people are improvising in social media and assumptions and misinformation that is being spreaded. And so we have to really halt that. This is important to analyze them and to see how that misunderstanding is coming from the different countries who are interested in that macroeconomics. So the work and also so the governments are really interested in when we talk about remittances, and this is a very sad discourse in the case of Mexican government. It's a very welcoming speech, and thanks to you, we're okay. When they do that, when they had that insecurity on Mexican territory. So we have to place that view on things that are being aligned with macroeconomics. Carlos?
Yo cierro probablemente con una verdad de perogrullo, y es que nuestro asidero y las posibilidades de salir.
The possibility of coming out very well from this situation is to have the basis very clear all the time, meaning we're there for what we're there. We are the discipline of overseeing. So there really has to be a clear notion of the context, which protects us from saying silly things and also we have to really understand the situation of everybody, what the migrant is living and what is going through, and the reasons why that people is going through that routes. While we have the basis clear on our discipline, we will be secure, we'll be safe. We're not superficial. It's not a superficial view regarding the phenomena. We try to have a context before going into the territory, which is the phenomena we're going to face, and obviously to have the possibility and the sources and the context to verify the information that we receive. And sources that normally we have not little time to share and to contrast them with the different mechanisms and tools which we have to make sure that the information that we're going to tell our narratives, it should be solid and without misinformation, nor generates false ideas regarding the circumstances and the context that we tell. I insist because it's very, very important. It's important, the need to seek empathy regarding the migrant, because it's very difficult to transmit empathy if we in the territory do not have a media coverage, if we do not open our ears and eyes without empathy. Thank you very much, Carlos, Monica, Alberto, and Cindy for being here today in this activity. Thank you very much for those assistants. Thank you so much. This is done with the Fundación Gabo. So I remind you, the next Wednesday, we'll have the last webinar where we're going to talk about the migration. So thank you very much.
En 1995, Gabriel García Márquez creó en Cartagena la Fundación para el Nuevo Periodismo Iberoamericano. Tras 27 años impulsando el periodismo independiente, ético, innovador y riguroso, ahora somos Fundación Gabo. Somos taller de periodismo. Formamos, inspiramos, incentivamos y conectamos a periodistas de toda Iberoamérica. Somos Premio Gabo. Premiamos el mejor periodismo en español y portugués. Somos Festival Gabo. Celebramos en Bogotá el poder de las historias en la mayor fiesta del periodismo y la curiosidad. Somos Centro Gabo. A partir del legado de Gabo promovemos proyectos de desarrollo social, cultural y educativo. Somos Fundación Gabo. Con camaradería y chéveridad desde el Caribe colombiano, promovemos un mejor periodismo, la creatividad y la memoria de nuestro fundador.